Hello, and welcome to the Dance Physio Podcast, a podcast designed to explore ideas and foster discussion around dancer health and wellness. We're here to challenge the status quo, bridge the gap between dance science and the studio, and help change the landscape of the dance industry for the better. I'm your host, Erika Mayall, a dancer turned physiotherapist who is deeply passionate about leaving the dance world better than I found it. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Dance Physio Podcast. I am your host, Erika Mayall. In today's podcast episode, we are going to chat a bit about packing for and preparing for summer intensives. This was actually an episode that was requested by one of the listeners who sent me a message and sort of said, hey, if you can, would you do an episode about summer intensives and sort of preparing for summer intensives, and specifically what types of things are important to pack from a physio perspective, or really like a dancer health and wellness perspective, I would say. So we're going to dive into that today. I will preface this by saying that obviously each individual summer intensive is going to give you a packing list. And so some of this stuff might be included in a packing list already. Some of this stuff might not be necessary depending on where you're going and what types of things they supply to the dancers, depending on the housing situation. Are you in dormitories? Are you living off site? There are so many factors that factor into this. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but this is just things that as a physiotherapist for dancers, I think are important for dancers to make sure that they have available to them when they are traveling to a summer intensive, especially when you're going to one that is out of town. So we will go through the list. This is going to be a pretty sort of short and sharp episode today, with not a ton of nuance in it necessarily, but if I miss anything that you're like, I cannot live without XYZ at my summer intensive or anytime I'm going to an intensive, I would love to hear from you. I will maybe share that list of that on social media because I do think this is really helpful for people, and especially dancers who are maybe attending their first summer intensive. I know that when I was a dancer, when you're going into something like this for the first time, you really have no idea what to expect. And like I said, the program is going to send you a packing list of some sort, but still having some information, like firsthand information from dancers who have been there, and especially have been to that particular intensive, can be really, really helpful. So hopefully we can start a bit of a dialogue about this. But I'm going to give you my list of, from a health and wellness perspective or like a physiotherapy lens, what I think are vitally important that dancers remember to pack with them when they go to a summer intensive. So, number one on my list, a very large water bottle. I think most dancers are pretty good at making sure they have a water bottle with them, but I would just say make sure that you have a fairly large capacity water bottle, because oftentimes summer intensives are hot depending on where you're dancing. The weather could be really, really warm. You might actually be needing to consume more water than what you would like throughout the year at your home studio. So a really large water bottle, and also consider electrolytes. So some dancers are definitely going to need electrolytes, and especially if you are somebody who has potentially some like autonomic dysfunction like POTS or things like that going on, electrolytes become really, really crucial to manage symptoms. And if you are one of those dancers, you probably already know that, and you're probably already using electrolytes really frequently. But even if you are not a dancer who struggles with dysautonomia or any kind of underlying medical conditions, when we are at a summer intensive, you're dancing really long hours most of the time. So it's often, an increase in hours over what you would used to be dancing. And more often than not, you're dancing in the heat of the day. So, at your home studio, you might be dancing a lot of hours, but they're often in the evening, and in the fall and winter, depending on where you live, it's usually not as hot outside. In the summer, the hours are longer, they tend to be daytime hours, and it can become a lot more critical to make sure that we are replenishing electrolytes. And this is something that might not be provided in a meal plan when you are living in a dormitory situation and your meals are being provided or made for you. it's important to make sure that we're maintaining these electrolyte balances, and that might not be front of mind for their sort of nutrition or dietitian staff. So something that I always recommend dancers pack with them is some sort of an electrolyte. I personally am partial to ones that come in like a powder form or like a tablet form, because then you can just put them in your water bottle when you feel like you need them. You might not need them every day. It might not be hot where you are. Who knows? They're small to pack, they're really light, and then you have the ability to add it or subtract it from your water. Versus we obviously can go out and buy pre-made electrolyte drinks or sports drinks that have electrolytes, so something like a Gatorade or a Powerade or any of those kind of sports drinks, and those might be available to you where you are, and so maybe you can get electrolyte replacement that way. Those are also sport drinks that have like carbohydrates in them as well, which can be great, but I also recommend just having a pure electrolyte source with you. And there's loads and loads and loads of different brands on the market, and it depends on what country you're in and what flavors you like and what type of sodium content you need. And so there's lots of different things, and you can maybe experiment around with them a little bit before you leave. But like I said, ones that are in a tablet form or a powder form, I tend to like the best because they're easy to pack, and then you can control the amount that you're adding to your water as well. You might some days only want a little bit added, and some days you might need a lot more added. So number one on my list, water bottle and electrolytes. Number two on my list is going to be anything that you need to make sure that you get a good night's sleep. This is going to be different for everyone, but when we talk about dancer health and wellness, and you've all heard me talk about rest and recovery and the importance of sleep, and we've done podcast episodes on all of those topics in the past, we know how important sleep is to overall health. And for a lot of dancers, and especially if this is maybe the first time you're going away to a summer intensive, or it's the first time you're going to this particular summer intensive, some dancers struggle to get used to sleeping in new environments and need things to help them with that. And so that could be like a special stuffy from home, like a comfort item of some sort. It might be earplugs, depending on what your sleeping situation is. Do you have roommates, or you're not used to sleeping in the same room as somebody and you can hear like breathing sounds or snoring or things? So maybe you need earplugs. Some people need like melatonin or things like that to help them fall asleep. So this is going to be incredibly different for every dancer, but anything that you know that you need to help you be able to fall asleep quickly and comfortably, and ideally stay asleep and get really good quality sleep while you were away, because that is probably one of our number one things for maintaining health and preventing injury, is making sure that we are getting adequate amounts of sleep. So that is a little bit of a wide open category there, because it's going to be so different for different people, but have a think about what you need to sleep, or what you might need to be able to comfortably sleep, and make sure that you have those packed with you. Number three on my list is a ball of some sort. I personally like lacrosse balls, but a lot of people like a tennis ball, or, you can buy specific kind of release balls that are branded from different companies and things like that. It honestly doesn't matter. You want a ball that is roughly the size of a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball, I would say. This is my favorite tool for being able to do some sort of self-massage and myofascial release and roll out tight spots and just do a bit of self-treatment. A lot of dancers really like foam rollers and will want to take one of those with them, and they can absolutely be a really valuable tool as well. However, they are much larger and oftentimes take up a lot of room in a suitcase. So if you're a little bit strapped for space, or you're trying to conserve space in your luggage or things like that, a ball is fantastic. It's super versatile. I actually think a ball is a lot more versatile than a foam roller, because it works really well to get into spots like the bottoms of your feet, or like certain areas that foam rollers are just like not as useful for. So that is not to say don't take a foam roller if you do have room, and say you're driving somewhere and you can take more stuff with you. But if space is at all a concern, making sure that you have some sort of a ball to be able to take care of your body and do some myofascial release and rolling muscles out and things like that is a must-have as far as I'm concerned. I actually always take one with me when I travel, even not to an intensive of any sort, or when I'm not, particularly dancing or whatever, but they're just so versatile and so useful for self-treating any little like aches or pains or things that crop up. So a ball is a must-have. Next on the list is some sort of a resistance band, and ideally maybe a couple, like one that's like a lighter resistance and then one that's a heavier resistance. And resistance bands, again, are just really, really versatile for being able to do some activation type exercises. They're great for waking up muscles as part of your warm up and making sure you're activating whatever muscle groups your body needs special attention to. The stronger resistance bands can kind of double as a bit of a stretching strap sometimes as well if you need that. And if any sort of aches or pains or injuries crop up and you're given any type of physio type exercises, like a lot of summer intensives do have medical staff, or like you can book an appointment with a physical therapist and they might give you homework type exercises. So if you have a band with you, then you're going to be able to perform those more easily. But even if you're not dealing with an injury or feeling an injury, bands are really, really great to work on some activation and potentially some strengthening exercises and just make sure that we are taking care of all of our muscles while we're dancing fairly intensively throughout the summer. Next on my list, I've lost track of what number one. I think this is number 5, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Next on the list is I always recommend that dancers have some sort of a compression sock or recovery sock that they can wear when they are not dancing. Again, summer intensives are often a big increase in hours over what a dancer is used to doing. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to promote and facilitate recovery between each of those days, because a lot of dancers are used to dancing a 6 or 8 hour day, occasionally maybe a competition day or a show day with dress rehearsals or things like that, but you might not be used to doing it 5 days in a row or even 6 days in a row, depending on the intensive, for weeks, like consecutive weeks. So we do have to really pay attention to recovery type things. And personally, I'm a big fan of using compression socks as a recovery tool. So this is not necessarily meaning that dancers need to dance in compression socks, although some dancers will, and especially for maybe contemporary or something where you're in bare feet, they may actually like to dance in compression socks. But I'm thinking of these more from a recovery perspective, something that dancers can put on at the end of the day when they're just back in their room and maybe relaxing, chatting with friends, watching TV, whatever it is they're doing, and having a little bit of compression just to facilitate some blood return and lymphatic drainage and things like that. So consider some sort of a recovery garment or compression socks. Some people have access to those, I call them moon boots. That's not what they're called, but they're like recovery boots that you stick your entire legs in. You maybe seen them before, and they have this pneumatic compression sort of pump system. In an ideal world, perhaps every dancer would have access to these. In reality, I know a few professional companies that might have a pair of them that dancers can sort of utilize or use, but this isn't something that is readily available or accessible to most dancers. So a simple pair of compression socks can sort of help facilitate the same process without having access to kind of fancy high-tech pneumatic compression. Let me see. Next on my list, this is specifically for dancers who are attending a ballet summer intensive. So if you are going to another style and you're not doing ballet and specifically not doing point work, then this doesn't apply to you. But making sure you have enough pairs of point shoes for the duration of the summer intensive, and actually probably overpacking point shoes because you may go through them faster than what you expect, given that the hours might be more than what you're used to dancing. But it's really important to try and make sure that you do have an adequate supply of point shoes, because dancing on dead point shoes is a really big risk factor for developing injuries, especially injuries in the foot and ankle. And I cannot tell you the number of times I've seen dancers come back from summer intensives with kind of foot and ankle stuff happening And when we start chatting about it, they're like, oh yeah, my shoes kind of died. And for the last week or the last 10 days of the intensive, I was dancing on dead shoes, but I didn't have access to a point shoe store and my parents couldn't ship me any because they weren't going to arrive in time or what have you. So making sure that we hopefully stock enough shoes. And, if you don't end up wearing some while you're there, you're probably still going to be able to wear them when you get back to your home studio. So making sure we have enough point shoes is really important for the ballet intensives specifically, because we don't want to be dancing on dead point shoes. Along a similar line as that, although this applies to all dancers, so not just ballet dancers, but we want to make sure that we have some sort of a mini first aid kit, and specifically things to deal with like skin injuries or skin issues, so blisters or splits in the bottom of the feet or things like that. And again, most dancers have preferred products, whether they're using like a second skin or certain band-aids or certain tapes that they like and things like that. But you want to make sure that you're stocking some type of I call it a skin first aid kit, but a first aid kit that specifically has things for skin injuries or surface type injuries, because there is nothing worse than trying to deal with like a recurring blister or a split in the bottom of your foot or something like that. And then it's just getting progressively worse and worse and worse every time you dance on it. Again, depending on the summer intensive you're at, they probably do have some first aid supplies, but most dancers, like I said, they have their own routine. They have their own supplies that they know that they like. And so making sure you have those with you really is helpful. And just so you have access to them and you don't necessarily have to wait to find a staff member who can like supply you with stuff and then maybe not know what products they have and that type of thing. All right, where are we on the list? It's not lastly, but the last thing that I think everybody should pack is a journal of some sort. And this actually might be part of a packing list for summer intensives. I think a lot require journals for dancers to take notes and, log feedback and things like that. But I also think a journal is really, really, really valuable from a mental health and kind of mental skills perspective for dancers, just to be able to write down their thoughts and their feelings and document what is happening, and whether that's more related to the creative process or more related to how they're feeling, what their experience is. But journaling can be a really, really powerful way of processing some of these experiences. Summer intensives can be very overwhelming for dancers. There can be a lot of mixed emotions. A lot of times, especially if it's your first time away, dancers might feel a little bit lonely or homesick at the beginning. And then oftentimes they, settle in, they make lots of friends. And then by the end, there's other emotions of being like really sad to leave all these new friends and not wanting to leave. And so a journal is just a really great way of dancers being able to have some way of kind of writing down their thoughts, processing some of those emotions while they're there, so that they're not bottling everything up and kind of suffering the effects of that. Now, the last thing on my list, and this is very much like kind of an optional, would be nice to have. I don't think it's crucial that people pack it, but I do know dancers who really like to take Epsom salts with them so that they can kind of do like an Epsom salt soak as part of like their recovery process. I had a dancer who was telling me that this was like one of her go-tos, and I was kind of shocked that she had access to something to soak in terms of when I think of like dormitory setups and stuff like that. They most of the time, I would say, do not have bathtubs, and most people are not like soaking in a bathtub in a dormitory living situation. When we started chatting, it turned out that she was living in like an Airbnb. It was a house situation that a bunch of the dancers from the intensive were living in an Airbnb type rental. So it actually did have bathrooms with bathtubs. So then that made sense. But this is something you could consider depending on your living situation. Maybe you are staying in a hotel with a bathtub or something like that. So maybe an Epsom salts bath or being able to soak. Or I do know dancers who will just do an Epsom salt soak for their feet. So maybe you do have like a bucket or a big bowl or something that you can put water in and put Epsom salts in. So it's not like a whole body soak, but potentially just for your feet. So something to consider. It's maybe like an honorable mention on the list. I don't think it is a absolutely you should like 100% be packing this, but it's kind of a nice to have depending on where you are in the situation you're in, and specifically the living situation. So that is my list of things that I think dancers should consider packing with them when they are going to a summer intensive, just to make sure that they can take care of their body to the best of their ability. Like I said, it's not an exhaustive list, and I would love to hear from all of you, especially people who have been to summer intensives before, and if you've been to multiple ones in different locations and you have things that you would add to the list that you're like, I found out I cannot live without XYZ, please send me a message. Let me know. I'll start a little maybe poll or something on social media and start collecting some of that information, because like I said, my list is not exhaustive. These are just the things that pop into the top of my head when dancers ask me, what should I be packing? Or often it's parents asking me, what should my dancer be packing? But I'm sure all of you have lots of amazing suggestions as well. So let me know and we can continue this list. Once again, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your time and your attention, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.